going to speak to something a little different today that I don't often speak to, but it's an interesting topic. It's religious cults or spiritual cults. Now, why am I speaking about this? Well, firstly, I received a message from a client saying, hey, can you speak to this? Can you open up a conversation about what it means to be in a religious cult? And then how one gets out of a religious cult if they feel that they are not connected to that practice or that quote-unquote worship anymore. And the interesting thing is that I've had a few clients actually that have grown up in religious cults. And so when we look at a religious cult, it's this veneration, this devotion towards a particular figure or a thing or an ideology. It's a small or even larger group of people having this belief or practice that is deeply connected and devotional, almost some may say even obsessive. And from outsiders looking in, it can be very strange. Now, I'm not here to criticize cults. I'm not here to criticize any specific religious cult, but I want to go into a little bit about the idolizing and the worship and where it comes from. So, even if a cult leader is placing something above him or herself, a god, a celestial being, an ideology, a belief system, a system of operating in the world, what generally happens is that cult leader, or leaders sometimes, they end up becoming idolized. And more often than not, they want that. They want to be idolized. And you know what the interesting thing is about cults or religious cults, from my experience and working with people in a very deep one-on-one capacity around this, is that it's way more common than we think. It's far more common than we think. And so as a child, if your parents are part of a cult or part of this moving trend, you almost don't have a choice. You go where your parents go, where as children we are so reliant on our parents. We're so reliant on our primary caregivers. We don't really have a choice. We have to go and we have to be what our parents or our primary caregivers tell us. Now, this indoctrination, this exposure to a certain belief system, we go through life thinking, well, this is right, this is correct, this is the way to be in the world. Come back to the cult structure for a moment. And again, I'm not an expert in cults by any means. This isn't what this is about. This is about human behavior. And that cults and religious cults, spiritual cults particularly, are far more common than we think. And so people are being influenced and impacted during their developmental years and taking these ideologies, this ethos, these set of beliefs into their adult relationships. And much of the time, there is a rigidity around these cult beliefs. There's, if you stray, you will be ostracized, you will be demonized, you will go to hell. And there's this fear that's instilled in individuals, in children particularly, that they take this fear, this unconscious and conscious fear, into their adult relationships. And it's destructive, it's isolating, it's separating. And so why may this happen? Fear. So a cult, the ideology or the veneration, this deep devotion, this almost obsession with a belief system or a way of being, generally comes from a lack, a place of scarcity, a place of we are not enough, or a place of pain and fear themselves. And so someone will start a cult. A leader or a group of people will commence a cult to feel that they belong. Maybe when they grew up, they either were in a cult and they continue the tradition, or maybe when they grew up, as they were growing up, they were isolated. They were ostracized. They felt they did not belong. They felt they weren't part of something meaningful. They weren't part of something deeply connected. And so what happened? They created their own sense of meaning, their own sense of connection. Maybe they took from different religious constructs, spiritual constructs, ways of being in the world, and developed their own. And generally there's a rigidity around that because the rigidity keeps people in that family, in that cult. That means that people stay connected and people stay admired and honored and revered. Most cult leaders are hurt little children that haven't grown up. Not all, of course, but even that word cult, it doesn't carry a positive connotation. It carries a negative connotation. really, when you think of the word cult, you think of something that's obsessive or rigid or unhealthy or fear-based or weird or strange. And that may not be the case. However, when we start unpacking these cult leaders and the rules around being in a cult, they are very uptight, they're very rigid, they're very restricted, they're constricted, they're fear-based. These are elements of what it means to be in fear. We ostracize those that don't align with us, that don't connect with our way of being in the world. That's very isolating and separating. So these individuals that haven't healed themselves from the abuse that they've experienced, or this sense of not belonging, this sense of not being part of something meaningful and important and being part of something in their minds great, have developed a belief system, or they advocate for a belief system that places them in the center of not only being adored and being popular and being seen as the person that's passing the torch, even being seen as the person that is actually doing that deep work and representing this higher power, which places them on a pedestal, which idolizes them, which deifies them. Now, if you're in a cult as an adult and you're still there and your family may be still there, but you're struggling to leave, what do? Well, you have to find sense of meaning outside of the cult. It's important that you begin to look at yourself and see your own sense of worthiness, your self-worth. Admire that. Embrace that. Notice that in the world. Notice it in reference to the relationships that you have. Begin to see that there are other ways of being, that you are not alone, that you can move through this fear and this pain, that if you detach from that cult, you're not going to hell. You're not going to be damaged. You're not doing anything wrong. Now, it's easy to say that, and it's more difficult to do, because that fear is entrenched within us. You're going to need support. You can't do it necessarily alone. You may be ostracized by parts of your family, some of your family members, mother, father, brother, sister, cousins, aunts, extended family. And this can be deeply challenging and very painful. It's important that you surround yourself with people that see you. The way that we bring shame, being in a cult and being part of an organization that is rigid or is not understood, it can bring up a lot of shame for us. The way that we deal with shame is bringing shame to the light. We don't ignore the shame. We're with it. We don't pretend it doesn't exist within us. We own it. And so in order to do that, you must surround yourself with people that you trust, respect, and revere, people that see you. To be seen is a basic, fundamental human need. To be understood, connected to, felt, accepted, respected. And so you may have to go through a period of either being more on your own in solitude, knowing that you can function through life, gaining that confidence. It may be a combination of being part of another group that is healthier, that isn't so rigid and constricted, where you feel freer to express without judgment, without being shamed for who you are or questioning the norm or the narrative, the dominant narrative of that group. That is going to help you break free and shift, understanding that the leaders, the people at the top, the upper echelon of the cults, generally are wounded individuals, pained. They've been abandoned, they've experienced loss, massive amounts of abuse more than likely. Maybe they carry narcissistic tendencies. They're hyper self-absorbed, hyper selfish, damaged in their psyche, emotionally imbalanced. Are they really healthy leaders if they don't accept you wanting to leave? It's a tough subject, and it's more than just what we're speaking about. But I'm going to stop it there for now. This is great food for thought, and I think it's more than just a conversation about a cult. It's a conversation about belongingness and making meaning of the experiences that you have in your life and how you make meaning of these experiences. Taking our sovereignty, autonomy, and power back. Knowing that you're worth it. You're worth taking that power back. And sometimes in cults, there is tremendous, and not all cults, but some, there is tremendous abuse that takes place. And breaking free of that, that's not an easy thing to do. That requires time, patience, and support. Power and blessings to you. I'll see you soon.